The archived Reddit post was still timestamped 3:00 a.m. My wife calling me, a man-child, and asking how to take more of my $5.2 million payout. Then I found the $34,000 transfer and the divorce timeline hidden behind the prenup she wrote herself. I said nothing until both our families sat down for dinner. Then I placed one highlighted clause beside her plate. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a software developer, or I was, before the company I'd spent 4 years building got acquired. The deal closed at $5.2 million. My wife is a paralegal at a mid-size firm. Steady job, good income, the kind of person who always knew exactly how much was in every account at any given moment. During the years I was building, she was the one covering most of our expenses, roughly $3,800 a month in rent and utilities, while I pulled a minimal salary and put everything else back into the company. She was the responsible one. I was the one betting on a dream. For a while, that felt like a partnership. We got married about 2 years into the project. She brought up the prenup around 6 months before the wedding. She framed it as protecting both of us, which, given that she was the primary breadwinner and I had uncertain income, made sense on its face. She was the paralegal. She drafted the language herself, pulled from standard asset protection clauses her firm used, adapted to our situation. I read through it, asked a few questions, and signed it. I trusted her judgment because she understood this better than I did. And I signed without pushing back on the specific language because, honestly, at that point, the company felt more like a long-shot hope than a real asset. Looking back now, I think she felt the same way. What I didn't know then, what I didn't find out until weeks after the acquisition was announced, was that the prenup she drafted was structured to protect whoever held the majority of marital assets at the time of divorce proceedings. When she wrote it, that was her. Steady income, modest savings, a husband with an unproven startup. She built the document to protect her position. I understood that part. I always understood that part. What I didn't understand was what she'd been doing while I wasn't paying attention. 3 days after the acquisition was announced publicly, my phone lit up at 11:47 at night. A college friend. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years, the kind of friendship that survives mostly through occasional check-ins and shared links. His message said, "Hey, this might be about you." I recognized some of the details. Might be nothing. He included a link. I almost closed the app. I was tired. The deal was still in final paperwork. I had emails I hadn't returned, and I didn't have the energy for whatever it was. But I recognized some of the details made me tap the link. The post was in a relationship advice forum. The account used a username I almost recognized, something she'd mentioned once, years ago, when she was helping a friend troubleshoot a tech issue and had used her own login as an example. I'd completely forgotten it until I saw it again. I read the post. She described herself as a paralegal who had carried her husband for years while he chased a startup pipe dream. She mentioned a prenup she had drafted herself. She mentioned an acquisition in the works, somewhere north of $5 million. She mentioned growing closer to someone at work. She asked whether a prenup drafted by one spouse could be successfully challenged, and what the best timing was for initiating divorce proceedings to maximize her position during a liquidity event. She called him a man-child. She said she'd wasted her best years on someone who needed a participation trophy to feel validated. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I did the only thing I could think to do. I took a screenshot. I checked the username twice against what I remembered. I went through the details, the acquisition number, her job, my job, the prenup, and every single one matched. I didn't call her. I didn't send a text. I set the phone face down on the counter and walked to the coffee maker. She was asleep in the next room. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and let my brain do what brains do when you're not ready to act, but you can't stop thinking. I started going back through things. The jokes that weren't quite jokes. During a rough patch about 18 months into the company, she said, "You really think this is going to work?" I told myself she was venting stress. Partners do that. I filed it and moved on. The silence during bad quarters. There was a stretch of 4 months where the company was genuinely close to folding. I was working 16-hour days, trying to keep it alive. She was quiet in a particular way during those months. Not cold, exactly present, functional, but quiet, like someone waiting to see what happened before deciding how to feel about it. And the pitch deck. I sent her the executive summary of our series, a pitch maybe 2 years in. She glanced at the table of contents at dinner and said, "This is cute," then changed the subject. I thought she was teasing. I know now she wasn't. She never asked to read the full deck. Not once. There was something else I'd noticed but couldn't name at the time. The prenup came up around investor meetings. Not aggressively, just casually, like she was running maintenance on a system. After a good meeting, the kind where you come home feeling like it might actually work, she'd find a reason to bring it up. I noticed the pattern. I didn't know what to do with it. Then there was her boss. His name started showing up at dinners sometime in the last year. At first it was context. My boss handled something like this. Then comparison, my boss would have approached that differently. Then just presence, his opinions, his decisions, how he ran things. She talked about work with more energy than she'd had in years. There were later nights, a work trip I hadn't known about until a few days before she left. A dynamic that had shifted in a direction I couldn't quite locate. I didn't name what that was at the time. I wasn't ready to name it. And then the dinner 2 weeks before the DM arrived. We were sitting across from each other, and she said, "I've been patient. I think we need to start talking about what this means for us." I thought she meant our future. A house. Next steps. Something real. Then she asked me specifically, clearly, whether the acquisition payout would be considered marital property or personal business income. I answered her honestly, in full, because I had nothing to hide. She was calculating an exit. I was talking to my wife. I kept all of that quiet. She didn't know I'd seen the post. I needed a few days to think before I did anything. Over that next week, I started noticing other things. She was on the phone with her sister more than usual. Not short check-ins, long calls, the kind that ended when she heard me coming down the hall and she'd wrap up quickly. Her mother, who I hadn't spoken to in a couple of months, called to check in. Warm, casual, asking how I was adjusting to everything. I said I was doing fine. She said, "Good. Your wife just seems a little worried about you." You know, since the deal, that was the first time I understood what was actually happening. A few days later, my own mother called. She wasn't alarmed, just passing something along. She'd heard through a family friend who knew someone in my wife's circle, the kind of small social web you stop noticing until it suddenly matters, that my wife had been saying I'd changed since the money came in. That I'd grown distant. That she didn't recognize me anymore. I hadn't said a single word to my wife about what I'd found. Not one word. She was already building the story. The devoted wife who believed in her husband, carried him through the hard years, and then watched him become someone unrecognizable the moment success arrived. It was a clean narrative. The kind that holds up well in a conversation with a judge, in a text to a mutual friend, in a family dinner where someone asks what happened. And it was partially true, which is what made it effective. She had carried the household. That part was real. The part she was leaving out was everything else. And what made it effective was that it was preemptive. She wasn't defending herself against something I'd said. She was laying groundwork for something I hadn't done yet. By the time I did anything, the version of me she was describing would already exist in people's minds before they heard my side of it. I won't pretend I wasn't angry. I was. But I was also aware that anger was exactly what she was expecting, and that if I walked in and confronted her, I'd be giving her precisely the scene she needed to make the story stick. I didn't say anything. She proposed a dinner. Both families. A steakhouse she'd been wanting to try. A celebration of the acquisition. She'd make the reservations. I said that sounded great. I spent 3 days doing something I'd never done before. I built a case. The first thing I did was go back to the Reddit link. The post was gone. She deleted it. I don't know exactly when, but it came down within 48 hours of when my friend sent it to me. If I'd waited another day to open his message, there would have been nothing there. But I'd taken the screenshot before it disappeared. And then I found the Wayback Machine, an internet archiving service that crawls and saves public web pages automatically. The post had been indexed before she deleted it. I pulled the archived version. It was all there. The username, the full text, the timestamp. Timestamped 3 weeks before the acquisition was announced publicly. She was planning before the deal was even confirmed. I printed the archived page. Then, I went through our joint account records. We had a shared account for household expenses, her idea, set up early in the marriage, which I'd always appreciated as practical and organized. I pulled the last 60 days of transactions. In the week after the acquisition went public, there were 2 transfers I didn't recognize. $20,000 moved to an external account on the day the news was announced. $14,000 more, 5 days later. $34,000. Into an account in her name only. I called a family law attorney. She came through a referral, a college friend who'd gone through his own divorce a few years back and said she was thorough. I brought the Reddit screenshot, the Wayback archive, the bank records, and the prenup. She looked at the prenup first, read it through, then went back to the beginning and read it again. She set it down. Your wife drafted this? I said yes. She said, the clause here, this protects whoever holds the majority of marital assets at the time of divorce proceedings. She looked up. When she wrote this, she was the primary earner. This was designed to protect her position. A pause. But the acquisition changes everything. A $5.2 million payout received during the marriage, held in your name as the business founder, that's the majority position now. Under the language she wrote, that's what's protected. I didn't say anything. She continued. She could attempt to challenge it. Anyone can challenge a prenup, but a licensed paralegal arguing that an agreement she drafted herself was somehow unfair to her, that's an extremely difficult case to make. Then she picked up the bank records and looked at the transfer dates. She said the timing, both transfers within days of the public announcement, would likely be characterized as anticipatory dissipation of marital assets. It didn't reverse the prenup, but it weakened any negotiating position considerably. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like I'd been handed a document that explained something I'd been trying not to understand for a long time. She built the lock. I was just holding the key. I went back to the attorney a second time. We documented everything formally. She walked me through what to do and, just as importantly, what not to do before any confrontation or filing. What I did after that was simple. I stopped. I stopped filling silences with conversation. I stopped working to make evenings feel comfortable. I was still there. I made dinner. I said good morning. I answered when she spoke. But I wasn't performing anymore. I was just present. There's a difference between the two, and once you notice you've been performing, it's hard to go back to it even if you wanted to. She noticed. One evening, she looked at me across the kitchen and said, "You seem far away. Is this about the deal? All the stress of the paperwork?" I said, "I'm just processing things." She accepted that, which told me something. I called my parents. I kept it factual. I told them what I'd found, what it meant, what was likely to happen. My father didn't say much. My mother asked, "Do you want us to be at the dinner?" I said yes. I want to be clear about something. I didn't agree to the dinner to set a trap. I didn't want theater. What I wanted was for the truth to be in the same room as the story she'd been telling, and for the people she'd told it to be there when both existed at once. She had organized this dinner. She had invited both families. She had picked the restaurant. She had assembled the audience. I was just going to show up. There was one practical thing I did before Friday. I printed the Wayback Machine archive page, the full post, the timestamp, everything, and folded it into my jacket pocket. The screenshot on my phone was real, but screenshots can be questioned. A timestamped archived page from an independent service is harder to argue with. She'd been careful. She deleted the post. What she hadn't considered, what most people don't think about until it's too late, is that deleting something from the internet doesn't always mean it's gone. The dinner was on a Friday. I pressed my shirt and went. The restaurant was the kind of place where they bring bread before you ask, and the lighting is low enough that everyone looks better than they deserve. She'd chosen well. Both families were there. Her parents, her sister, my parents. 6 of us at a round table, plus the 2 of us. She was in a good mood, visibly, genuinely good. She held my arm when we walked in. She ordered for the table without asking, and no one seemed to mind. Her mother asked about our plans. What came next, now that the deal had closed? She talked about a house she'd been looking at, something we'd mentioned in passing months ago, which she brought back now like it was a settled thing. She talked about a fresh start. She talked about what the $5.2 million meant for us, what was possible, how much had changed. She ordered champagne. When the glasses arrived, she held hers up and said, "To us, and to everything we built together." I left my glass on the table. She didn't notice, or she chose not to. The conversation moved. Her father asked about the company, the deal structure, the team. I answered. My father asked about the timeline for final paperwork. I answered that too. The food arrived. People ate. Her sister asked about travel. Her mother talked about a cousin's upcoming wedding. And then she said it. She was midway through a sentence about the house, a neighborhood, a commute, a timeline, and she said, "I mean, with the $5.2 million now, we could really buy it." I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. I placed it face up on the table. The screenshot was on the screen. She stopped mid-sentence. Her mother leaned forward. Her father looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. My mother, who already knew, reached across the table and put her hand over mine. My wife looked at the screen, then at me. Then she said, "That's not, you don't understand the context." I didn't respond. I reached back into my jacket and placed the printed Wayback Machine page on the table beside the phone. The full archived post. The timestamp 3 weeks before the acquisition was made public. The username, all of it, on paper, from an independent source that had nothing to do with me. Her sister picked it up. "Read it." Set it down slowly. Her mother sat back in her chair. My wife looked from her sister to her mother and then back to me. Her mouth opened and then closed. I watched her try to find a version of the next sentence that worked, and not find one. The table was quiet in the way tables only get when everyone understands what they're looking at and no one knows what to say first. I said, "The prenup you drafted protects the primary asset holder. I wanted you to understand that before we had any more conversations about our future." I called the server over. I paid for the dinner. I said goodnight to both families. And I left. She followed me. I'd booked a hotel room that night. Not for effect, practically. I needed somewhere to go that wasn't our apartment, and I wasn't going to ask her to leave before I'd spoken to my attorney about next steps. She caught me in the lobby. The version of her from the restaurant table was gone. She stood in front of me and went through what she had left. First, soft. "I love you." I was scared. I was just venting. I didn't mean any of it the way it sounds. "You have to know that." I let her finish. Then harder. "I carried you for years. You know that. The rent, the bills, everything while you built that company. I deserve to have that recognized. I deserve what's fair." I said 2 things. "You moved $34,000. That wasn't venting. And then I took my attorney's card from my wallet and held it out. She took it. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened. I stepped in. She was still talking when the doors closed. I didn't hear what she said. The attorney called me the following week. Her legal team had reviewed the prenup, and, according to mine, they weren't finding viable grounds to challenge it. A paralegal who drafted her own prenuptial agreement and then argued in divorce proceedings that it was unfair or that she hadn't fully understood its implications. That's a difficult position to hold, professionally and legally. The document she wrote was enforceable as written. The asset transfers were raised in preliminary discussions. Her own attorney flagged them before mine needed to. The timing was too close to the acquisition announcement to be explained away. Moving $34,000 from a joint account in the week a liquidity event goes public doesn't look like routine financial management. It weakened her negotiating position significantly. She didn't walk away with nothing, but she didn't walk away with anything close to what she'd been planning for when she posted that question to Reddit. The post itself didn't stay between us. My college friend hadn't been the only one who saw it before she deleted it. A few other people in overlapping social circles had come across it, recognized the details, made the same connection, and hadn't reached out because they weren't sure what to do with it. Once the dinner happened and the story moved, it started circulating. Not as a campaign. Just the way things move in a connected group when context suddenly snaps into place. Someone would mention it to someone else. A screenshot would get forwarded. A conversation that had been going one direction would quietly shift. The supportive wife who believed in her husband narrative didn't hold up once people had read what she'd actually written about him. The version of events she'd been seeding for weeks, the patient, devoted wife undone by a changed man, collapsed under the weight of her own words. There was nothing I needed to say. She'd already said it. There was one more thing. Her boss, the one whose name had come up at our dinner table 3 times a week for the better part of a year, his wife filed for legal separation about 6 weeks after the steakhouse. She named my wife in the filing. I don't know the full details, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I know is that my wife left the firm shortly after that. I closed the acquisition. I paid the attorneys. I took a month off. I didn't have a plan for what to do with a month off. I got in my car and drove down the coast. I stopped when I felt like stopping. I ate at places I'd never heard of. I didn't check my email until I wanted to. There's a particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from work. It comes from performing a version of yourself for a long time, keeping things steady, keeping things moving, telling yourself the silence means nothing. That's what I was trying to sleep off. I thought a lot about what 4 years of building something looks like from the inside: the doubt, the bad quarters, the long stretches where you don't know if it's going to work, and what it means to share that time with someone who was counting down to the exit while you were just trying to keep the lights on. The prenup she wrote was ironclad. She just never thought it would protect